Dad was always a little rough. Anyway, I watched him karate chop her arm, and I remember just crying myself to sleep. The bipolar or mental illness stuff came out. I am sensitive, reactive, or allergic to psychotropic drugs. I was seeing like 7 different guys. I married him, and he wanted to control me. He threw me around the night my son was born, and an hour later my water broke and my son was born, and he was bruised, and the placenta had been torn away from the wall. Tried to slice her face, cut her breast off so no other man would want her. So I'm going through life thinking that all this is normal. He was constantly picking on me and beating me, and you've got 5 felony counts, 2 child endangerment, 2 DUI, and a possession of paraphernalia. And so that's when I started my recovery.
Hello everyone, and welcome back. My name's Kelly. We make videos of us talking to everyday people and listening to their stories. It's amazing the things you learn when you just take time to talk and listen. Every one of us is a hero in some way. So come along as we tell you another true story of an everyday hero. We met Pam last summer when we decided it was time to add a new fur face to our family. As soon as I talked to Pam, I knew she would be a lifelong contact. We just seemed to understand one another immediately. And that afternoon, we found ourselves in her lovely home, meeting our new family member, our golden-eyed angel, Luca. During the process, we had an opportunity to chat with Pam a bit and got just a glimpse into a life story that was truly inspirational. We knew immediately we wanted her story to be included on this channel. It took several months, but she eventually agreed to talk to us on camera. What you are about to see is the story of a woman who had everything in the palm of her childhood hand, and yet strayed down a dark and dangerous path, and then eventually found her way back to the light and joy of healthy and sober living. This is the first of a 3-part series. Part 1 is not for the faint of heart. Be fair warned. It's a fascinating tale of Phoenix before it became the megalopolis it is today, a teen troubled by mental demons and substance abuse, abusive and unhealthy relationships, but more than anything, it's a story of how the human spirit endures and seeks to thrive, even despite circumstances that may seem hopeless to many. This is part 1 of Pam's story. You will fall in love with the spark in her eyes and her story of survival. It is a true tale from everyday life.
I was born in Chicago, Illinois in 1958. My family came from Lakeshore Drive. They were fairly well-to-do. Well, my dad, since his mom had tuberculosis, he knew his entire life he wanted to be a doctor. He decided he wanted to start his practice in Phoenix, Arizona in the 60s. It was perfect because there wasn't much going on here then.
Well, how was Phoenix in the 1960s?
It was great then, too, like it is now, but it was not nearly spread out as it is now. There weren't very many doctors, so it was a nice place for Dad to set up his practice. In Paradise Valley, which at the time, there was nobody out there. We had this fabulous view of Camelback Mountain and the Praying Monk, and it was really amazing. It was beautiful. And there was no homes nearby except on our little street. In Paradise Valley, the only mansion was McEwen's mansion and Barry Goldwater's home. But we had a lovely home with a swimming pool and, of course, desert landscaping. It was nice. It was wonderful. You know, it was a wonderful place to grow up. We also had a private unfenced school across the street with a giant field. And we had a gully, which we did get a heavy rainstorm once, and we all took, floaties and things out there to. But it was really a magical time, and horny toads and scorpions, and but that was back in the day when the parents told you go play, and you went outside, and you didn't come in until the streetlights came on.
You mentioned that you didn't have a lot of furniture growing up in that house. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Seems like an odd combination.
My dad was in private practice, which meant he had the bills for everything in his doctor office. And I can't speak for my sisters, but I know that I slept on a fold-up cot. My grandparents, my mom's parents, were very helpful with giving us a couch and things like that. So we had, some old furniture, but we didn't have any drapes or carpet or furniture. Our living room and dining room had no furniture for many, many years, and I didn't ever think anything of it, even when I would go, over to a friend's house, because they all had furniture, but we had red concrete floors.
You spent quite a lot of time on native lands and with native people growing up. How did that come to be, and what are some of the memories you have of those times?
Both my parents were interested in Native American. We had a gal that was going to school at Phoenix Indian School, and she would go to the school there during the week, and then on the weekends she would come with us. And one of my most memorable vacations was when we went down to the Chilchimbito area, Four Corners area, to visit her family, and they farmed sheep and they lived in hogans, and I was fascinated by their lifestyle. And I got to learn how to fry bread with her family, and we were sitting having dinner at one point, and I was ravished, and I loved the stew that I was eating. It was fabulous. And of course, I thought the sheep were so cute, and it wasn't until my dad said, "Well, it's mutton stew, Pam. What do you think?" And I said, "It's so good." And he said, "Well, you know what mutton is, don't you?" And I said, "No, but it's wonderful." And he said, "They're sheep." And I was affected by that. But my dad liked to do little things like that. He would kind of throw things in there to just kind of, I still ate it, but it was, I was probably 8. I was younger. But it was still a wonderful experience, to meet the family and see how they lived. And, they were truly natives living on the reservation. And I was just grateful for the experience.
Tell us about the fabulous family vacations you remember from this time in your childhood.
My parents went to school with another doctor and his wife, and they also moved to Arizona around the same time we did. They moved into a house just around the corner from where we were, and it was fun to hang out with them because they had this magical 2-bedroom, and they had a dumbwaiter and all this property, and it was fabulous. But we did a lot of fishing with them. One of our trips we went down to Rocky Point, and we borrowed a senator, a Bluebird bus. He was then the senator of Arizona. We were in his giant Bluebird bus. That was when RVs were not like that, but his was. And I remember the kids got to sleep on the top down there, and it was fun. It was magical, And I'm grateful for that kind of thing. I didn't realize other people didn't have that kind of vacation.
You were really close to your maternal grandmother and then got sick.
It was probably the roughest year of my life because we were very close. I was very close to my mom's parents, my grandma specifically. She taught me how to sew. And so that was such a wonderful gift, But about that time, she got pancreas cancer that turned into brain cancer. And that was at Christmas she had the pancreas, and by July she was gone. And I remember being so traumatized, seeing her with all the staples in her head, and it was kind of rough, And I can't imagine what my mother went through, but about that time after Grandma passed, that was about when my dad left us.
How did you find out that your parents were divorcing? That must have been really rough, considering that you were starting high school right about this time also.
Dad was always a little rough around the edges, and but I watched him. One night I came out into the kitchen, and my mom and dad were kind of arguing, and I watched him handing her some papers, and Anyway, I watched him karate chop her arm, and that was the first time I had ever seen any kind of abuse or whatever you want to call it. And that was when he left, and that was when she told me that, and it was shocking. And my parents had a very messy divorce. It took like 4 or 5 years, which was more trauma. It's trauma, you know. In the meanwhile, I started high school, and my mom wanted us to go to private Catholic school so we could get an education to go to college. And I never did well in school. I learned how to read before I went to school in first grade. I was an avid reader, but they actually pushed me through, and I skipped first grade. And that was probably a terrible mistake. I don't think they do that to children today, because I was socially delayed, and I was already always the shortest kid in the class. And I think that kind of contributed to some of my fears and insecurities, and some of the things that I never learned to cope with or deal with as a child.
How did your mental health issues become known to you? And what was your first memory of things weren't just right?
I remember as a 4-year-old laying on my cot in the first house. I remember just crying myself to sleep. And, so it started very young for me. But I've always had so much mental noise going on. And, had I learned to meditate then, it probably would have been my saving grace. But I didn't. And, or had I had a connection to Source, or God, or whatever y'all want to call it, that would have really helped a lot. But unfortunately, that's not what happened, and my coping skills were poor. But I never did well in school. Third grade was when I started struggling. I don't think I ever caught up. Maybe they probably should have held me back in third grade.
So when did you go off track and start getting into alcohol and boys?
Yeah, I started getting a little wild, and that's not something that the parochial schools appreciate. And by sophomore year, I was even hanging out with the boys because they drank like I drank, and so that was kind of, under the bleachers. I'd go to the school dance, but I wouldn't go to the school dance, and that kind of thing. So
what were the circumstances that facilitated you into beginning to abuse alcohol at such a young age?
My dad had a grape arbor in the backyard. He grew his own grapes, and back in our dark pool bathroom, he was even making wine. There was stuff fermenting in there. It was really gross. He also had a little keg of beer in the fridge. And we had a cabinet in our kitchen, a big cabinet on the lower level, which full of booze. We had more booze in our kitchen than we did dishes. So, it was everywhere. And my mom drank 3 beers a night, and she felt like she was an alcoholic. By the time, I'm in high school, my dad's gone, and my mom's just trying to keep it together. And that with my younger sisters too. So I would go out with my friends, and we would drink. And my dad left all the booze behind, and we started out drinking the vodka, and we would put water back in it so nobody would know. And we finally figured out we've watered down our own vodka because nobody else is drinking it. I found out at that time that my girlfriends didn't drink like I drank, and they would get sick, and I wouldn't. What did happen for me though is I would go into a blackout, and that's alcoholic. Luckily, I was hanging around nice boys that took care of me. We'd go out on the field across the street with a big bottle of booze and no mixers, and just drink up, but they made sure I got home, and my mom never suspected anything until my sisters and I had a room. Mom got us our own phone. And the room had bookshelves down both sides, and one all the way across, and then a window. And we put a stereo, big stereo, one of those cabinet stereos in there. And we had a couch, and we had a table and a couple of chairs because we were doing homework in there. And then the two of us shared the bedroom. But I remember one summer we saved all the Bacardi bottles because I like to drink 151 rum. Didn't mess around with the hardcore stuff, but we had an entire top row of 151 bottles because we just saved them. And you know, my mom was, I don't want to say she was powerless, but she kind of, I think she turned a blind eye because I was home and she knew where I was. She wasn't very well though. The divorce just about killed her. It really did. And I think her family, her dad especially, felt like she had done something wrong to cause the divorce. So she crumbled.
Where and how does the family history of mental illness begin?
My youngest sister was first, and it got, you know, emotional and violent, and then sometimes, you know, of course, child of the 70s, we're smoking pot, you know.
So when did things start to go downhill?
I want to say I was a junior. Not all my friends drank, but I had some friends that came from public high school, and so and I started seeing an older guy, so it really started going then. I started failing Spanish. I hadn't done well in biology. They caught me smoking in the bathroom, you know, dumb, cigarettes. But I started getting in trouble at school. My dad was not pleased that we were in Catholic high school. He was angry. And we saw him once a month, and we were angry. We were all very angry and frustrated, and except my mom. But it was tough.
How did it come about that you moved in with your dad for a while?
Well, at one point I was giving my mom such a hard time, and I said, fine, I'm gonna go live with Dad, and which really hurt her because he pulled the child support she was getting for me. When I lived with my dad, I realized that wasn't no picnic. He would drink wine at night, and we would cook dinner together, and then I'd have to clean up, and then I wanted to go with my friends, and he'd say, well, sit down here, Pam, and I'd sit down at the table, and then he'd pound on the glass table as he got more and more intoxicated, and then he'd look up and he'd say, why don't you ever clean that light? And I'm like, oh, I don't know, Dad, I never thought about it, you know, I'll do it right now. And my girlfriend's out front waiting for me, and you know, that's the kind of interaction that we had. My dad was still really cool, and he was a gourmet cook. He taught me how to chop chicken and some wonderful things. But his approach was rough, and that's what he had grown up with. So, and I get it all now, you know.
You moved back home with your mom then for the rest of your high school time.
I was junior, and I finally moved back into her house. I was done with Dad. You know, they had put these expectations on me to bring my grades up, and I ended up going to the public high school. But I already had most of my credits in order to graduate, so at public school I was able to take quite a few electives, business machines, clerical office training, you know, that kind of thing. And so when I graduated, I was 17, but I had some skills. I had something I could put on a resume, basically.
And then what happened? How did you get your adult life started?
I paid an employment agency to get me a job, and I got a file clerk job at Ramada Inn Executive Offices. And that's kind of when my travel career started. When I was on my lunch, I would work the PBX for the girl that was the PBX, so I learned a new skill, and it was fun. A lot of people, you know.
Were you still drinking? And when and how did the drug abuse start?
I was living with my boyfriend at that point. He got an apartment, and I moved in with him. And again, the apartment was a big party zone. You know, we had parties, pool parties, everybody drank, and I was already alcoholic.
You've mentioned to me in the past about nervous breakdowns and bipolar disorder. When did those happen and how did you get help?
By then I had already been diagnosed as bipolar. Probably in my 20s, my younger sister calls me up and she goes, "I know what's wrong with us." And I said, "What?" And that's when she said, "I've been diagnosed, rapid cycle bipolar, and you need to go, you need to go get seen, and so you can get treatment." And I'm like, "Okay," And so I did that and got on medication, and I spent a lifetime battling medication because I found out I am sensitive, reactive, or allergic to psychotropic drugs. And so that's why they continue to change my medication, because I couldn't get it right.
How did you get to work in a travel agency?
I wanted to be a travel agent, so I went through the phone book calling travel agencies. I'm very resourceful. And by the time I got to this Atlas Travel, which happened to be right down the street, and I said, "Hi, I'm interested in becoming a travel agent. Can you give me any advice?" And they said, "Of course, go to school, but do you have any other skills?" And I said, "I do, I'm in accounting." And they said, "We need a part-time bookkeeper." Ding, ding, ding. It's like I hit the lottery, And that's kind of how my life has been. It's always gone forward like that. But about that time, I started working as a part-time bookkeeper, and then I was doing part-time outside sales.
But you lost your job eventually?
I was going to lunch and drinking, and I was drinking, at night, going out, and, I never went into work in the same clothes, but, it was starting to take its effect on me, and so I was let go. And they told me it was because they didn't need a part-time bookkeeper anymore, which I thought, yeah, they do. I'm busy. But come to find out when I went to file for unemployment that they said no, that I was, late for work, and, and so my alcohol was impacting me at that point. I moved back in with my sister. My sister's always been my saving grace. I always get to run to her. She's always there for me. So I moved in with my sister and her husband. They were newly married, and I started cooking and cleaning for them. And my dad calls me up and he says, "Hey Pam, I got a possible job for you. I have a patient who just bought his wife a travel agency, and she needs a bookkeeper." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, baby." So there I was back in the travel industry, which I loved. And within a week, she had fired the manager and pushed me into the management position. So that turned out to be a really big break for me. I was going out every night drinking. I was seeing like 7 different guys consistent, 3 of them were named Tom. It was getting very confusing. And I'd have to change bars because I don't want to run into him again, kind of thing. But I always made sure that they were drinking what I drank, which was rum and Coke. And then I would just steal their drinks. But it was fun and flirtatious, and nobody ever wanted to kill me,
How did you meet your first husband? And what was that marriage like?
I had a part-time job at an answering service, and this guy was a dog trainer, very sultry voice. And so all these women calling him. I married him, and he didn't want me traveling. He wanted to control me, and I should have seen the signs, but I was married. Then I was going to get pregnant and have a baby, and and he was abusive. He liked to rip gold chain off my neck after he bought it for me, and anyway, I was pregnant with my son. I got to go to Hawaii. He didn't shut that down. I'd never been to Hawaii. I'm managing a travel agency. It cost the agency about $300 then, years ago, to send me to Hawaii for 3 islands. When I married him, I think that I knew I was in trouble. He did not drink, and he didn't like me drinking. First thing he did to keep me out of the bars was buy me a pool table, because I like to go play pool in the bars. At one point in time, he came to the office where I'm managing and saw the cigarettes on my desk and flipped, went out, took the distributor off my Jeep. He bought me a Jeep, and that's the kind of thing that I accepted that, you know, because I didn't know any different, I guess. He dressed me. My first husband liked to dress me, and I got married in a sundress, you know. I was a cute little travel agent, so I wore little touristy picnic clothes, and he didn't like that, so he went and bought me all these, and I was overjoyed at the time, these button-up neck with a bow tie, cover myself and my pants, but they were all so cute, and he spent money on me. I'd never had anybody do that. You know, we didn't have clothes as kids, and so I was, you know, I was enchanted. But anyway, he threw me around the night my son was born. He threw me out of the bed, he threw me down the hall, and he threw me out the door. And an hour later, he's like, "I'm sorry, come back," you know, in the house. And an hour later, my water broke, and my son was born 7 weeks premature, and he was bruised, and the placenta had been torn away from the wall. I drove myself to the hospital because I was such a wreck, you know. And my son was born, and he showed up. He showed up and acted as if nothing was wrong. He wanted a child. He had raised a stepson who was living with us at the time. He was 14. And so I thought this was going to be ideal, you know. But he had charisma, and oh, he was just, and I fell for it, hook, line, and sinker, because.
And how did that marriage end? And there's quite a story there also, isn't there?
I took a cruise to Mexico for the company. I'd never been on a cruise. Travel agents sell cruises. So my company sent me, and it was when I came home from the cruise that he served me with divorce papers. And so I was pregnant again already with my second child with him. We got divorced. I never told him I was pregnant until later on we got together to do income taxes. And don't you know it, I remarried him. So I was, at the time, I didn't know, I was his 5th and 6th wife. Apparently he liked to get married. Anyway, we had a year-long divorce, and nervous breakdown. That's when the nervous breakdown, and I was living again in my sister's home. She and her husband had moved off to Saudi Arabia to make a lot of money, and I was taking care of their home. But about that time, I snapped, you know, and I was alone in the house with 2 babies, and I was working part-time for the attorney to pay off this big divorce bill, which was dumb. But it all worked out, because the day after the divorce, he moved away and married wife number 7. And I have these 2 wonderful children. It wasn't until, the reason he signed the divorce papers was I had called one of his ex-wives, and she had been a rodeo queen, she's a beautiful girl. But I called her and I said, "I need help. I got a messy divorce. He's fighting me for custody, and he's violent." And so she said, "What can I do?" And I said, "Well, can you give a deposition to my attorney?" And she said, "Yes." And my attorney wouldn't let me read the deposition, but it turned out that he had tried to slice her face, cut her breast off so no other man would want her. And once he knew that I had her deposition, that was the end of the fight. And he signed our papers, $200 a month child support, and moved away.
What then? What happened next?
So I'm going through life thinking that all this is normal, you know? Now I know it's not, but yeah, I broke down and got back up. got back up, went back into travel. I was a quality control supervisor. We had 5 branches, so I did training. I was part of the hiring team. I did public speaking. That's when I got back together with Matt's dad. I had Matt's dad when I was seeing 7 different guys and years before. Poor choices. You know, my life's been about poor choices. You know, I would not do those things. I would have do those things differently, but it was one big party. It was one big blackout. You know, he had a saying for all the parties and pig roasts and, you know, 2 in the river every weekend. We always had a bottle of wine and a quart of Jack Daniels and, you know, and insanity. It was insanity.
So then what happened? How did that go?
He had no moral conduct whatsoever. He was very, he wasn't a well person, and a lot of drugs. But he wasn't going to share that with me, so I wasn't deeply involved in it like he was.
Well, in all this party atmosphere, what caused you to make the decision to get sober?
What caused me to get sober was I was in a car accident, and I had Matt in the car with me, and I was driving home, and I was in a rollover accident. By then, Brian had bought a house in Peoria, but we couldn't get along. It was always fighting. It was always a war zone. He was constantly picking on me and, you know, beating me and whatnot. And I'm on my way home after having left him because I always tried to get away and I always went back countless times. I fell asleep driving. It's probably about 11 o'clock at night on the 101. Went across 3 lanes of westbound, hit the 2 cables and flipped my car over, I don't know how many times, and ended up crossing 3 lanes eastbound and draped over the back seat. Matt had been seat belted in, so he wasn't hurt. I was unconscious, had fractured my C3, glass and everything all over, and they called my oldest son, and he came and got Matt, and they took me to the hospital. I was unconscious for two and a half days. But, you know, my kids really suffered the brunt of it, of all of this stuff, because, you know, you think you really, I thought, oh, the kids don't know. The kids knew. You know, they definitely knew, and it impacted them. Plus, they watched me getting abused by, you know, by him. I don't know how they didn't lose all respect for me, because they're just wonderful kids, and they were raised right. They just were raised in a battle zone. But my son went to the hospital, and the police came and told him I was facing 5 felony counts. You know, okay, he was terrified. He was already terrified growing up in a war zone, and then here's his mom, I'm probably going to prison now, you know? So he's going to raise his brother. So when I came to, there were no cops, no tickets, no nothing. And so, feeling like I was invincible, I just continued on. I got a bill for the cables, you know, $1,500. Turned it into my car insurance. They paid it. Same with my car. I had to get another car, you know. So I had no direct impact from my DUI initially until 2 years later.
What happened 2 years later, and why that long?
And they do that in Arizona. They call it page 9 or Title 6. I don't know what it is, but there's some rule where they can bring it up later. And I guess they were maybe backlogged or whatever, but they finally, 2 years later, gathered it all up. And my grandson had just been born, and I was in Alaska. By then, I was curbing my use, my drug use. Didn't drink so much because of the blackouts. So I had really curbed the drinking, because I knew if I drank, I didn't know what was going to happen. But I was, using the drugs to stay awake because I couldn't stay awake. Anyway, while I was there, in Alaska, charges came in the mail to me saying, you've got 5 felony counts, 2 child endangerment, 2 DUI, and a possession of paraphernalia or something like that. I didn't know anything about it, but he sent it back to the court, said I wasn't there. We had gotten married 2 weeks before I went to Alaska because I think he knew I might not come back because of the abuse. And I do believe that. I do believe that that's why he married me. Because we were together for 25 years. 25 years I put up with that. And that's mentally ill. That's mentally ill and using drugs and alcohol, to mask it all. After I got back from Alaska, I got a bench warrant in the mail. Bench warrant? And I had no idea what it was for. So I go down to the courthouse, and don't you know, the judge knew me. And even though I was all, skinny, and I was back getting high again, they had me fill out paperwork, and I didn't know anything about him because he never told me. She told me, straighten up. I can't hear your case. Did you ever go by another name? Yes. And I'm like, oh gosh. So she shipped me down to Phoenix, and that's where I was arrested for the first time, put in jail, and my daughter bailed me out with my car, and was when I got sober. I sat in that jail cell, which was probably no bigger than this room, with 25 women, no toilet paper, and they were criminals. I wasn't a criminal. It's the crazy thinking, but that was it for me, because I sat in that jail cell, unmedicated at the time, a lot of mental noise and just crazy, and I was terrified of prison. And I knew with 5 felony counts, I knew what was going to happen. I got down to Phoenix, and that judge hated me. I was a menace to society. She put me on an ankle monitor, and I wasn't allowed to, really go anywhere. I was on a house arrest. I really didn't have any friends because they were all opposed to my lifestyle. They were in fear of my lifestyle. My family was in fear. So it was just me. And I started trying to figure out what I was going to do, how I was going to avoid prison. By then, my older children had moved out of the house. They both had gotten married right away, and had children. Each had a child of their own, and they went off they were safe. It was just Matt and I. I realized I need to get into an IOP, intensive outpatient, and so that's when I started my recovery. And it was July 29th, 2004. 19 years on Saturday. Right? I know. And I'm going to tell you something. These years have been the best years of my life.
Can you tell us more? What's it like to be sober?
Even with all of the mental noise and things that I still deal with that, but I've learned new coping skills. And it's completely turned everything around for me because I've become accountable. I've got goals. I have a support network, and I don't forget things, and I'm not trying to hide things. But I was on disability for a long time because of my breakdowns, and I don't remember a lot of my life. And my children were, God bless their hearts, they stuck by me. They turned out to be amazing people, amazing people. I have 3 kids. My oldest son, he's successful has a high profile it's a security clearance job, and my daughter I have one grandson through him, and he's getting ready to have another next month. So I'm very excited about that. I'm still close to his first wife because I knew her since she was 15, and so I call her my honorary daughter. And we all vacation together. My daughter is, she's a nurse, and she has a daughter. I'm just incredibly proud of them for turning out so well considering how they grew up. And Matt, my youngest, is, I wasn't supposed to have Matt because I had had my tubes tied. Then I found out I was pregnant, and I said, no, I can't be. I've had my, and they said, you are. And so I went, down under the covers for about 3 days and finally came to accept it. And he's my greatest gift, he truly is. He's stood by me through all this. And not that they haven't, but he's had to. He's been forced to. And he's turned out really well too, so.
You really worked hard being successful in recovery, didn't you?
I was very blessed to have wonderful people. I started working recovery deep into it. And I had some wonderful people who worked with me and helped me become a human, because I didn't know how to eat or do anything. I literally didn't eat, and all my behaviors were pretty much unhealthy. So I've been surrounded by these people, and at one point in time, I was still living with Matt's dad when I got into recovery, and that was that, we had nothing in common anymore. By that time, the judge decided that the ankle monitor wasn't enough. She wanted me on a GPS. And finally, at one very ugly fight that we were having, that Matthew was watching and listening to his dad call me these names and asking me to explain what that word was, and I'm like, oh my gosh, and I had a moment of clarity, and I said, we're done, let's go. And that was it. I never looked back. Took my GPS and illegally went up there to stay with my mom, and life has just been so wonderful since then. I'm able to look back on all these mistakes that I've made and grow from them. I'm blessed. Today I have a connection with Source, and I need that. I need that. I can't trust myself. So yeah, it's good. And I have this wonderful network of people. I've been on 3 sober cruises with big groups of like-minded people, which has been wonderful. And done the recovery life.
What keeps you busy these days, Pam?
I work security, and I'm pretty good at it. I got licensed. I work at the Cardinal Stadium, and I just love it. And I always joke that sometimes I think one of the reasons I was really, really good at catching people that are maybe doing some dishonest things is because I know those tricks. I see that beer in your armpit. And also I'm able to, even though I'm not a very big person, and sometimes I'm literally standing there talking to these big people, trying to diffuse the situation, but I somehow am able to talk to them, and so I've had pretty good success at it, and I enjoy it. I really do. I love it. It's fun. Very blessed, very grateful, very blessed and grateful for my life today. And honestly, it's only through recovery that I would be where I am today. And I know that. Only through recovery and God. Otherwise, I would be not who I am today. A work in progress, always growing. And that's the fun of it too, is I know that as nicely and smoothly, there's still blips in the roads. I still have challenges, but I'm able to cope with them better today. I know what to do, or I know what not to do. And so it works.